Get out of here. You're making my garage stink. Chief Engineer Grant Whitmore barely lifted his eyes from the Titan V12. Sir, I can hear what's wrong with the engine. I can fix it. Grant finally looked up. You can fix it? His expression twisted with disbelief. You mop floors, you unclog toilets, you get down on your knees and clean up everyone else's messes. And now you're standing here telling me you can fix a $12 million engine that 100 elite Grand Prix mechanics haven't been able to solve. He stepped toward Malcolm Reed, grabbed the front of his faded work uniform and pulled him closer. Go back where you belong, or I'll have you dragged out myself. 100 mechanics fell silent. Malcolm didn't step back. He didn't blink. His eyes moved past Grant and settled on the wounded engine. Not long after that, the same Grant Whitmore would do something nobody in that garage could have imagined. He would lower his head. Monaco was one of the brightest jewels in motorsport, a city carved into cliffs above the Mediterranean, where engine noise rolled between marble hotels and luxury yachts floated in the harbour below. Whenever the world's fastest machines arrived, so did the wealthiest owners, the most brilliant engineers, and the most ambitious racing teams on Earth. They all came for one reason: to win. And no team wanted victory more desperately than Whitmore Racing. Grant Whitmore had inherited more than a company. He had inherited a family legacy. 3 generations of Whitmores had poured their name, their money, and their pride into racing. Grant's grandfather had started with a single garage in the English countryside. His father had turned that modest operation into a serious contender. Grant believed his job was to turn it into a dynasty. The Titan V12 was supposed to be the machine that made that happen. It had taken years of research, a sealed development laboratory in Germany, a team of 18 engineers and 73 discarded prototypes before the final design was approved. The finished engine was worth $12 million. Whitmore Racing believed it could rewrite the record books. It was lighter than anything else on the grid, more efficient and more powerful. The simulations suggested it could cut an entire second from their best lap. In a race where victories could be decided by hundredths of a second, that advantage felt enormous. This was supposed to be the engine's great debut. The morning began like any other race day. Crews arrived before sunrise. Tool carts rolled across the garage floor. Coffee machines hummed in the back. Mechanics stretched their shoulders, joked with each other, taped their wrists, and checked equipment. The smell of brake cleaner, hot metal, and rubber hung in the air. During a routine warm cycle, lead technician Dean Foster fired up the Titan V12. For a few seconds, everything sounded perfect. Then came the knock, a deep, metallic thud from somewhere inside the block. Once, then again, then a grinding sound, harsh and wrong, like metal teeth dragging across a steel plate. The engine seized. Every screen on the diagnostic rack flattened at once. Dean's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. What in the world just happened? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Grant Whitmore rushed into the garage soon afterward, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, face drained of color. He leaned over the engine, like a surgeon over a patient whose heart had suddenly stopped. Run the full diagnostic. Everything. I want every sensor reading, every pressure log, every thermal scan. Don't leave anything out. They ran it all. The data came back clean. Every parameter sat within specification. No fault codes, no obvious anomalies. According to the computer, the engine was fine. The engine itself said otherwise. Grant called in his best people. Senior engineers crowded around the Titan V12, each one a specialist in a different field. Combustion, fuel systems, turbo mapping, electrical systems. They moved around the engine like doctors around an impossible case, touching the block, studying readouts, whispering theories, challenging one another, testing every possibility they could think of. Nothing worked. Word spread quickly through the paddock. Other teams began sending people over, not entirely out of kindness, but because curiosity in racing could be stronger than rivalry. A dead engine was interesting. A dead $12 million prototype was a global story waiting to happen. Mechanics from rival teams arrived with their own equipment and decades of experience. Some of them had rebuilt engines so many times they could have done it with their eyes closed. They worked in groups, rotating in and out. 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. Eventually, nearly 100 of the finest mechanics and engineers in motorsport had looked at the Titan V12. Still nothing. The race drew closer. Grant paced through the garage like a trapped animal. He had called the development lab in Germany. The team there was traveling in, but they would arrive too late. He called the sensor manufacturer in Japan. Their remote diagnostics showed no failure. He called in every favor he had earned in years of racing. Nobody could explain why the Titan V12 refused to run properly. And more than the race was at stake. A $200 million sponsorship agreement with Halcyon Automotive sat unsigned on Grant's desk. The condition was simple. Prove the Titan V12 on the biggest stage, and the deal would move forward. Fail to race, and Halcyon could walk away. 3 generations of Whitmore history had come down to one silent engine in a concrete garage. Grant slammed his palm against the workbench. Tools jumped. A wrench rolled over the edge and clattered onto the floor. Nobody bent down to pick it up. Somebody give me an answer. I don't care who it is. Engineer, intern, janitor, anybody. Somebody tell me what's wrong with this engine. He didn't really mean the janitor. That was frustration speaking. But Malcolm Reed heard him. Malcolm had been working since before most of the racing crew arrived. He always came early. He mopped the pit lane walkways, wiped down barrier walls, emptied overflowing trash bins filled with energy drink cans, food wrappers, and cable ties. He had worked around those garages for years, and in all that time, almost nobody had learned his name. To most people, he was simply the janitor. Sometimes they called him, "Hey, you." Sometimes they said nothing at all. He was just a man in a faded blue uniform, someone people walked around on their way to something they considered more important. But Malcolm listened. He always listened. Whenever engines came alive for warm cycles, Malcolm would slow his mop near the garages. He would tilt his head. Sometimes he would close his eyes. Engines spoke to him in a language most people never learned. Not through data alone, not through fault codes, through vibration. Through rhythm, through tiny spaces between sounds, where something could feel wrong before any machine could prove it. His grandfather had taught him that language, and Malcolm had carried those lessons inside him for most of his life. That morning, when the Titan V12 first started, Malcolm had been cleaning the corridor outside the garage. He heard the clean opening rhythm. Then he heard the knock. Inside that single broken sound, he heard something the others missed. The 100 mechanics were listening with instruments. Malcolm was listening with generations of hard-earned knowledge pressed into his memory, his hands, and his bones. He believed he knew what was wrong almost immediately. For hours he watched the experts search. He didn't watch with arrogance. He didn't enjoy their failure. He simply waited, because Malcolm had learned a painful lesson long ago. A black man with an answer nobody had asked for could be treated as more dangerous than a man with no answer at all. People often forgave ignorance more easily than confidence from someone they had already decided not to respect. But the race was getting closer. The engine was still dead, and eventually Malcolm could no longer stay silent. He leaned his mop against the wall. He dried his hands on his work pants. He straightened the collar of his faded blue uniform. Then he walked into the garage. The room was thick with tension and stale coffee. Far too many people were packed into a space built for a much smaller crew. Some leaned against walls with folded arms. Others still circled the Titan V12 with the exhausted expressions of people who had run out of ideas, but not out of pride. Grant stood near the center with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking sharply to someone overseas. Malcolm walked toward Dean Foster, the lead technician. Dean was one of the few people who had ever given Malcolm a friendly nod in the hallway. Dean turned and blinked. "Malcolm, what are you doing in here?" "The engine. I know what's wrong with it." Dean stared at him. For a moment he seemed unsure whether Malcolm was serious. Then a nervous sound escaped his throat, somewhere between a cough and a laugh. "You know what's wrong?" "Yes." Dean looked around the room. Then, against every instinct telling him not to, he raised his voice. "The janitor says he knows what's wrong with the engine." For one brief second there was silence. Then the laughter came. A snort from the back, a chuckle near the tool rack. Someone clapped slowly, mocking him. The laughter rolled through the garage like a wave. Nearly 100 people laughing at one man. Grant lowered his phone. "What did you just say?" Dean's face reddened. "He said he knows what's wrong." "The janitor." Grant walked toward Malcolm. The laughter faded as he approached. "The janitor says he can fix the engine that the best mechanics in the world couldn't solve." He stopped directly in front of Malcolm, close enough for Malcolm to smell expensive cologne mixed with engine grease and sweat, close enough to see the pulse beating at Grant's temple. "You mop floors, you scrub toilets, you empty trash cans. That's your job. That's what you do." Grant's voice hardened. "Don't stand here pretending you're something you're not." Malcolm met his eyes. "Calm, steady. Give me 30 minutes. The garage became silent. Grant's jaw tightened. One hand curled into a fist at his side. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not only anger, something closer to fear. Because a man who asked for 30 minutes with that kind of calm either knew something important or had nothing left to lose. Grant couldn't decide which possibility bothered him more. "Get him out of here." His voice dropped. "And if he comes back into this garage again, he's finished. Not just here. Everywhere I can reach. I'll make sure no racing facility in Europe hires him again." Two security guards moved to Malcolm's sides. Each took one arm. Malcolm did not resist. He let them guide him toward the door. His work boots squeaked against the polished concrete. As they pushed him across the threshold, Malcolm turned his head. He looked at the Titan V12 one more time, silent under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by brilliant people who still could not hear what it had been saying all day. Something shifted in that room. Not loudly, not in any way anyone could easily explain. But near the back of the crowd, a young engineer named Naomi Pierce watched Malcolm's face as security led him away. She did not see confusion. She did not see a man bluffing. She saw certainty, the kind that doesn't need permission. Naomi pulled out her phone. She sent one word to the man sitting in the team owner's lounge above the pit lane. "Come." That man was Everett Langford. He was the owner of Whitmore Racing, the person whose signature ultimately carried more weight than Grant's title. And the moment he read Naomi's message, he stood up. What almost nobody in that garage understood was that their assumptions about talent, education, status, and who deserved to be heard were about to be challenged in a way none of them would ever forget. And it would begin with one man asking for 30 minutes. Malcolm Reed had not learned engines from a university textbook. He learned them the way some people learn prayers. Through repetition, through reverence, through years of watching someone he loved treat mechanical work as something almost sacred. His grandfather, Isaiah Reed, had grown up in Alabama in a small house with no running water and a tin roof that sang whenever rain struck it. As a boy, Isaiah could take apart an old Ford flathead V8 and put it back together in near darkness. While still very young, he could diagnose a misfire from across a yard simply by listening. People in the area began calling him the Whisperer. Some white farmers brought their trucks to the back of his family's property after dark. They were too embarrassed to be seen asking a black boy for help, but too desperate to leave their engines broken. Isaiah repaired their machines. They paid him in small bills, coins, and silence. He applied for work at garage after garage, The answer was always no. Sometimes the rejection was polite. Sometimes it was openly cruel. One owner told him they did not allow people like him to touch their machines. Another made it clear that Isaiah's skin mattered more to him than Isaiah's ability. Isaiah kept a record of every rejection in a small leather notebook. Years later, that same notebook would rest in Malcolm's back pocket. But Isaiah never stopped learning. Behind his house stood a corrugated metal shed that leaned slightly to one side. Inside it, he built his own workshop. He collected discarded engines from junkyards. He bought tools one at a time from pawn shops whenever he could afford them. A single hanging bulb lit the room, flickering whenever the wind disturbed the wiring. That shed became his classroom, his refuge, his cathedral. And Malcolm became his only student. From the time Malcolm was a small child, he spent weekends in that shed. Isaiah would sit him on an overturned crate, place an engine part in his hands, and say the same thing. Close your eyes. Feel it. What's it telling you? At first, Malcolm felt nothing beyond cold metal, rough edges, and weight. But Isaiah never rushed him. Week after week, year after year, he taught Malcolm to feel the difference between a valve seat that sat perfectly true and one that was wrong by a fraction too small for most people to notice. He taught him to hear the difference between a healthy combustion cycle and one that stumbled. The differences were tiny, sometimes so small that ordinary tools could miss them. But trained fingers and trained ears could still notice. An engine talks to people who know how to listen, Isaiah told him once, wiping his hands on a rag so stained no one could remember its original color. Most people are too busy making noise to hear what the machine is saying. Malcolm never forgot those words. They became part of the way he lived. As he grew older, his skill became extraordinary. He could rebuild transmissions faster than experienced local mechanics. He could diagnose faults that shop owners with decades of experience struggled to find. Isaiah's notebook grew thicker, its pages filled with hand-drawn diagrams, timing charts, compression ratios, formulas, observations, and careful notes written in a slanted hand. For Malcolm and Isaiah, it became more than a notebook. It became a record of everything they had learned together. Then Isaiah became sick. It began with a cough that would not leave. Then came weight loss. Then mornings when his hands could no longer grip a wrench. The diagnosis was lung cancer. Years spent working in poorly ventilated spaces, breathing metal dust and exhaust fumes without proper protection, had taken a terrible toll. The same work that gave Isaiah purpose slowly stole his breath. When Isaiah died, Malcolm was still a teenager. The shed went quiet. The hanging bulb could still flicker, but nobody turned it on anymore. At the funeral, Malcolm held the leather notebook. He did not cry in front of everyone. Not because he wasn't shattered, but because Isaiah had taught him that some burdens are carried standing up. After that, Malcolm's world narrowed. There was no money for college, no powerful connections, no respected engineer willing to recommend a black teenager from Alabama who lacked formal credentials and had grease beneath his fingernails. Malcolm worked construction. He washed dishes. He drove delivery trucks. He took whatever honest work he could find. Every job seemed to pay less than the value he carried. Many employers looked through him as though he were made of glass. Then he found an opening for janitorial staff at Grand Prix pit facilities. The pay was modest. The work was invisible. But the position placed him near the garages, near engines. That was enough. He accepted the job. After his shifts, Malcolm often stayed behind. He told no one why. He sat in empty corridors outside the garages, leaned his back against the wall, closed his eyes, and listened. Warm cycles, diagnostic runs, engines idling while crews tuned them toward perfection. He absorbed every sound. He compared what he heard with Isaiah's notes. He added observations in the margins. Quietly, privately, he taught himself the language of racing engines he had never been invited to touch. Months earlier, Malcolm had noticed a misaligned fuel relay on Whitmore Racing's backup car during a late walk through the garage. He corrected it without telling anyone. He cleaned the area, then he left. The next day, Dean Foster looked at the car, scratched his head, and told the crew the problem seemed to have disappeared on its own. Nobody asked how. Nobody thanked anyone. The car simply worked. Malcolm smiled to himself, a small private smile, because Isaiah had been right. Engines spoke to people who listened, and Malcolm had been listening his entire life. Everett Langford did not knock before entering Garage 7. The door opened, and the mood in the room changed at once. Everett was not a loud man. He did not need to be. Silver-haired, dressed in a simple navy suit without a tie, he carried the quiet authority of someone who owned everything in the room and had no reason to remind anyone of it. Grant straightened immediately. His phone disappeared into his pocket. "Mr. Langford, I didn't know you were coming down. We're handling it." "You're not handling anything, Grant." Everett's voice was low and even. "I just watched your security team drag a man out of this garage. A man wearing a janitor's uniform." "Who was he?" Grant's jaw tightened. "Nobody important. Maintenance staff." He wandered in, started talking nonsense about fixing the engine, so I had him removed. "What did he say exactly?" "He said he knew what was wrong." Grant gave a humorless smile, which is obviously absurd. The man mops floors for a living. Everett turned toward Naomi Pierce, who stood near the back of the garage with her arms folded. "You sent me one word. Come." "What?" Naomi hesitated. Nearly every face in the room turned toward her. She was young, early in her engineering career, and one of the least senior people present. Speaking against Grant could cost her everything. She knew it. Still, she answered. Because when they took him out, he wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He looked at that engine the way we look at something we understand. She paused. "I've been staring at the Titan for hours, and I don't have that look. None of us do." A different kind of silence settled over the garage. Not the mocking silence Malcolm had faced earlier. This one carried uncertainty. The uncomfortable feeling that perhaps everyone had missed something. Everett studied Naomi for a moment. Then he turned back to Grant. "Bring him back." The words seemed to explode through the room. Grant's face flushed. "Mr. Langford, with respect, this is ridiculous. He's a janitor. He cleans bathrooms. He has no certification, no engineering degree, no formal racing experience. You cannot seriously be thinking about handing him a $12 million prototype." Everett did not raise his voice. I said, "Bring him back." Grant gestured toward the crowd. "We have nearly 100 engineers and mechanics in this room, some of the best in the world. Rival teams sent specialists. And you want to give the engine to a man who pushes a mop? Your experts have had hours. The race is getting closer. The engine is still broken. I'm giving the janitor his chance. Bring him back now." Grant froze. For several seconds, nothing came out of his mouth. Finally, he turned towards security. "Get him." A short while later, Malcolm Reed walked back into Garage 7. He looked exactly as he had before. Faded blue uniform, calm face, hands relaxed at his sides. If being dragged out had humiliated him, he refused to show it. If returning in front of the same people who had laughed at him stirred anything inside him, he kept it deep beneath the surface. Everett met him halfway across the garage and extended a hand. Malcolm shook it. Firm, brief, steady. "What's your name?" "Malcolm Reed, sir." "Malcolm?" "My engineer says you believe you know what's wrong with this engine. Is that true?" "Yes, sir." "How do you know?" Malcolm looked towards the Titan 512, then back to Everett. "Because I can hear it. The engine has been telling everyone what's wrong since this morning. Nobody has been listening." A murmur moved through the crowd. Someone near the back gave a nervous laugh and quickly stopped. Everett nodded. "You asked for 30 minutes. You have them." Grant stepped forward. His voice was tight. "Fine, 30 minutes. Let's make this official." He turned so everyone could hear him. "If this janitor fails, and he will, I want him fired. Not transferred. Not reassigned. Fired. I don't want him working near another racing garage under my name again. Then he looked at Everett. Those are my terms. Everett did not blink. And if he succeeds? Grant laughed once. He won't. But if he does? Grant's smile disappeared. Then I'll admit I was wrong. Right here, in front of everyone. Satisfied? Everett turned to Malcolm. Are you willing to accept that? Malcolm's expression did not change. I only need the engine running at idle and 30 minutes to work. Then it settled. News moved through the paddock almost instantly. By the time Malcolm approached the Titan V12, the garage had changed. Mechanics who had been leaning against walls pushed forward. People from rival teams gathered at the entrance. Media crews appeared. Journalists squeezed closer. Several people raised phones and began recording. One live stream carried a simple caption describing what was happening. A janitor was about to examine a $12 million Grand Prix engine after experts had failed to diagnose it. Viewers began joining by the thousands. Malcolm noticed none of it. He stood in front of the Titan V12, close enough to touch it. But he did not touch it yet. He stood the way Isaiah used to stand before beginning a difficult repair. Still, patient, reading the silence before touching the machine. Then Malcolm reached into his back pocket. He pulled out the old leather notebook. Nearly 100 engineers watched a janitor place a cracked, oil-stained notebook beside one of the most advanced racing engines ever built. A few people smirked. Others leaned closer. One senior specialist from a rival team quietly asked what the notebook was. Malcolm opened it near the middle. There was a hand-drawn diagram of a V12 intake manifold. The labels were written in careful slanted handwriting. Isaiah's handwriting, decades old, still precise. Malcolm ran one finger over the diagram. Then he looked at Dean. Start the engine. Idle only. Keep the revolutions low. Dean glanced at Grant. Grant said nothing. His arms were crossed. His jaw was set. His expression seemed to challenge Malcolm to fail. Dean looked toward Everett. Everett nodded. Dean reached for the ignition control. The entire garage held its breath. Nearly 100 people. Cameras. Thousands of viewers watching online. And one janitor standing beside a machine the racing world could not understand. Dean activated the ignition. The Titan V12 coughed, shuddered, coughed again. Then it caught. A rough, unhealthy idle shook the engine mounts and sent vibration through the concrete floor. It sounded like a heart fighting to beat through pain. Malcolm closed his eyes and listened. For nearly a minute he did not move. The Titan trembled on its mounts. Its broken rhythm filled the garage. To most of the engineers, it was the same ugly noise they had already heard over and over. To Malcolm, it was a conversation. He tilted his head slightly, first one way, then the other. His breathing slowed. His hands remained loose. He was not looking at a screen. He was not reading numbers. He was listening for something beneath the noise, something his grandfather had trained him to notice long before Malcolm knew the language of digital diagnostics. Everyone watched him. Some expected a miracle. Others expected humiliation. Grant tapped his watch. Malcolm opened his eyes. He walked to the left side of the engine block. He crouched beside the third cylinder and placed his bare ear against the aluminum. No stethoscope. No electronic probe, just skin against metal. Exactly the way Isaiah had taught him when Malcolm had been too short to reach an engine block without standing on a wooden crate. After a few seconds, Malcolm stood. Microfracture. Intake. Valve seat. Third cylinder. Dean immediately pulled up the scan report. We checked every valve seat. Twice. The scans were clean. Your scanner only resolves damage above a certain size. This fracture is smaller. At normal temperature, it stays nearly closed. Under operating heat, the metal expands and the crack opens. When the engine speed rises, it allows a small amount of unwanted air into the intake charge. Not enough to trigger a fault code, enough to disturb combustion. Malcolm tapped the cylinder head gently with one knuckle. You can hear it. A faint breath of air where no breath should be. It's been there all day. A senior combustion specialist from a rival team leaned forward. His arms were no longer crossed. "Run a dye penetrant test," Malcolm said. "You'll see it." Grant pushed away from the workbench. "We're not wasting more time on guesswork. Do it." Everett spoke only those two words. Dean prepared the test. Penetrant was applied, then cleaned, then developer. Everyone pressed closer. The cameras lowered toward the engine. The live audience continued climbing. A thin, pink line appeared across the valve seat. A fracture. Tiny. Easy for the scanner to miss. Impossible to deny. Exactly where Malcolm had said it would be. The silence afterward had weight. Nearly 100 trained professionals were staring at proof that a man with no formal title had found what all of them had missed. Grant's expression emptied. He stared at the pink line as though the engine itself had betrayed him. Someone whispered, "How did he hear that?" Nobody answered. Malcolm was already moving. He ran his fingertips lightly along the fuel rail, slowly, barely touching, like someone reading raised letters with closed eyes. He passed over one injector after another. Then he stopped. He rested 2 fingers on the housing of injector 5. Off axis, by a fraction of a degree, Russell Vance stepped forward. He had spent decades designing injection systems and held patents in the field. He had personally supervised the alignment. "That's impossible. I checked those myself." "Within your tolerance," Malcolm said. "Not within what this engine actually needs." That tiny off-axis position creates an uneven spray pattern on the second bank. The fuel mixture runs slightly lean. Not enough for the software to flag it. Enough to create uneven combustion pressure across the block. He glanced toward the damaged valve seat. The two problems are amplifying each other. Repair only one, and the engine still risks serious damage once it's under racing load. Russell stared at him, then held out a hand. "Get me the laser alignment rig." The equipment arrived. They checked the injector. The reading matched Malcolm's estimate. Exactly. The garage erupted into stunned whispers. Engineers turned toward one another with the same question written across their faces. How could he feel something that small with his fingertips? Russell removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. The reading had not changed. He looked at Malcolm, then nodded once. A small, respectful nod. The kind one craftsperson gives another when words would only make the moment smaller. Grant's arms had fallen to his sides. The color had left his face. His eyes moved between Malcolm and the instruments as though the ground beneath him was shifting. The live audience continued to grow. Malcolm opened the leather notebook again. The paper had yellowed. The ink had faded. But the diagrams remained exact. Beside one drawing of a V12 intake system, Isaiah had written a formula. A timing offset calculation. Additional notes filled the margins. Ideas refined over years. Tested. Reconsidered. Improved. All of it developed in a leaning shed beneath an Alabama sky by a man who had never been given the opportunity to work in a professional garage. "There's a third problem," Malcolm said. "This one isn't mechanical. It's calibration." He held the notebook open. People leaned closer. "Your ignition timing uses a standard algorithm for an engine in this displacement class. But the Titan isn't standard. It has a wider bore and a shorter stroke. The compression ratio combined with your current timing creates a tiny pressure spike before peak load. The control system interprets it as normal. It isn't. It's early detonation, partly hidden by the engine management software. Most of your screens won't show it clearly, but it's there." He tapped Isaiah's formula. Over time, that pressure can damage more valve seats. Eventually, it destroys the engine. Malcolm looked down at the handwriting. "My grandfather worked out a version of this problem decades ago on an engine with a similar displacement relationship. No advanced computer. No simulation center. No degree. Just a pencil. A flickering bulb and a mind people kept telling him wasn't welcome." His voice stayed steady, but something deeper entered it. "Offset the ignition timing by 1 point 4 degrees at peak load. The pressure spike should disappear. Combustion should complete more cleanly. Nobody spoke. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed suddenly loud. From beyond the garage walls came the distant cry of a seabird over the harbour. "Run it," Malcolm said. "Simulate the change." Dean typed the adjustment into the simulation. Everyone waited. The results appeared. Power output improved beyond the original design target. The torque curve smoothed across the engine range. The dangerous pre-detonation signal disappeared. The Titan V12 had not merely been diagnosed, its calibration had just been improved. Years of research, dozens of prototypes, a team of elite engineers, and a missing answer had been sitting in a handwritten formula inside a cracked notebook, created by a man the professional world had never allowed through its doors. Dean turned from the screen. His face was pale. "We worked on this calibration for years." "How did he—" He stopped. Malcolm was not looking at the screen. He was looking at Isaiah's handwriting, at the careful letters of a man who had died without ever seeing a professional racing garage from the inside, a man whose lungs had been damaged by the work he loved, a man who had been denied opportunity again and again. And yet, years after his death, something he had written had just solved a problem that nearly 100 world-class specialists could not. Everett Langford slowly rose from his chair. He did not clap. Not at first. He simply stood. Naomi stood next, then Russell, then Dean, then the rival specialists, then the journalists, camera operators, mechanics who had laughed at Malcolm. One by one, row by row, people rose to their feet for a janitor holding his grandfather's notebook. The applause began with a single pair of hands near the back. Then more joined. The sound grew. It was not polite applause. It was emotional, shaking. The kind that comes when people suddenly understand they have witnessed something larger than a technical repair. Grant Whitmore remained seated. His hands gripped the edge of the workbench. His knuckles were white. His eyes stayed fixed on the simulation results. Cold digital numbers proving that nearly everything he had assumed about Malcolm was wrong. He did not stand. Not yet, but slowly his grip began to loosen. The applause faded. The theory was sound. The simulation worked. But Malcolm knew theory was not enough. The engine still needed to be repaired. The race was drawing closer. He rolled up his sleeves. "I need a replacement valve seat for the third cylinder, a precision torque wrench, an injector alignment jig, and access to the engine control flash terminal." Dean sent mechanics running for the parts. When everything arrived, Malcolm arranged the tools across the workbench in a precise order, left to right, exactly in the sequence he intended to use them. That was how Isaiah had taught him. No wasted movement. No searching. No panic. Every second mattered. Malcolm began with the damaged valve seat. His hands moved with a fluency that quieted the entire room again. He did not rush. He was precise. Every motion had a purpose. He removed the damaged seat using slow, even pressure so the surrounding surface remained untouched. The cracked piece came free in one piece. Malcolm held it beneath the light. The fine fracture was visible. A faint trace of pink dye still clung to the edge. Then he placed it aside. He fitted the replacement, a thin, even layer of compound. Careful pressure. He pressed the seat into place until his fingers felt what his eyes could not easily see. True alignment. Then he used the torque wrench. A few clean clicks. Done. He moved to injector 5. Russell was already beside him with the alignment jig. Nobody had asked Russell to help. He had simply stepped forward. Malcolm guided the correction. A tiny rotation. A secondary clamp locked in place to keep vibration from shifting it again. Russell's hands were steady. His eyes followed Malcolm's fingers carefully. "Check it," Malcolm said. Russell ran the laser. The readout settled on perfect alignment. He released a long breath. Then Malcolm moved to the engine control terminal. The screen cast blue light across his face. His fingers moved over the keyboard with quiet confidence. For years, he had spent spare hours reading technical manuals others had discarded. He had taught himself the digital language of engines he had never been invited to work on. Now that hidden education came alive beneath his hands. He opened the ignition mapping, found the peak load timing table, adjusted one value, 1.4 degrees. He compared it with Isaiah's handwritten formula. His eyes moved from screen to notebook, then back again. Save the flash. The new calibration loaded. Malcolm stood. He looked at the Titan V12, then placed one hand gently along the top of the engine block. He was not checking a measurement. He was simply feeling it. The way someone touches a thing they have spent a lifetime waiting to hold. He stepped back. Start it. The garage went still. People around the world were watching through screens. Nearly 100 people stood only a few feet away. Cameras recorded every movement. One janitor in a faded blue uniform stood beside a $12 million racing engine. And in the next few seconds, the Titan would either prove Malcolm right or prove Grant right. Dean placed his hand on the ignition control. He hesitated, then activated it. The Titan V12 turned over. Once, again. Then it caught. Not the broken idol from before. Not the coughing, shaking sound that had filled the garage with dread. This was different. The engine settled into a smooth, deep, resonant hum. Clean, even, powerful. Every cylinder fired in perfect sequence. The vibration through the floor no longer felt like a tremor. It felt like a heartbeat. Strong, steady, alive. Diagnostic screens began turning green. Sensor after sensor, parameter after parameter. The improved power figure held. Nobody spoke. Dean stared at the data. Russell stared at the data. One rival specialist closed his eyes and slowly shook his head, not in disbelief anymore, in surrender. Malcolm stood quietly. Grease marked his fingers. The notebook rested in his back pocket. His faded uniform still carried stains from the cleaning work he had been doing before anyone knew his name, before he walked into that garage as the janitor, before anyone there understood who he really was. Everett approached him. This time he did not offer a handshake. He placed both hands on Malcolm's shoulders. His eyes were wet. "Your grandfather would be proud of you." Malcolm nodded once. His throat tightened. Then a chair scraped against the concrete behind them. Grant Whitmore stood. Every eye turned toward him. Every camera followed. Grant walked toward Malcolm slowly. Each step seemed heavier than the one before. His face no longer held anger. No arrogance. Something had broken open inside him. Something was being rearranged. This was the face of a man watching his own beliefs collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. He stopped in front of Malcolm, chief engineer, third-generation racing heir, the man who had grabbed Malcolm's uniform, the man who had told him he did not belong, the man who had treated a job title as though it measured a human being. Grant lowered his head. A deep, slow bow. He said nothing. He did not need to. The bow admitted what his pride had refused to say. He had been wrong. And no title, degree, family name, or inherited prestige could erase what Malcolm had just proven with his ears, his hands, and an old leather notebook. From somewhere near the entrance, someone spoke the words everyone was thinking. The janitor fixed it, and the world heard. After the engine came back to life, Everett Langford led Malcolm into a small office behind the garage. The room was simple. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the harbour where sunlight stretched across the water. Everett closed the door. The roar of the garage, the voices, the cameras, and the sound of the Titan humming outside faded behind the glass. He sat down. Malcolm remained standing. "Sit, please." Malcolm sat and placed the old notebook on the desk between them. Cracked leather, yellowed pages, Isaiah's handwriting open beneath the light. Everett looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Malcolm. "I'm not going to insult you by offering you a better janitor's paycheck. I'm offering you a position as lead engine specialist. Full authority, over the Titan program. Your own research and development budget. A salary based on what you proved today, not on what your old badge said. Malcolm did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on the notebook. You would report directly to me, Everett continued. Not to Grant, not through the existing engineering chain, directly to me. Outside the window, the harbour glittered in the afternoon light. Malcolm finally looked up. How much? He did not ask, because money was all that mattered. He asked because he needed to know whether Everett truly understood his value. Everett told him. The salary was many times greater than what Malcolm had earned pushing a mop. Malcolm sat quietly. His fingertips rested against the edge of Isaiah's notebook, on the page containing the old engine diagram, on the formula that had helped save a $12 million engine and a $200 million business agreement. I have one condition, Malcolm said. Everett leaned forward. Name it. I want the team to fund a foundation for young black men and women who have the ability to become engineers but cannot afford the education or get access to the right opportunities. Young people with talent who never got the door opened for them. He touched the notebook. I want it named after my grandfather, the Isaiah Reed Foundation. Everett did not hesitate. Done. That's all I want. Everett studied him. In that moment, he understood that Malcolm was not simply negotiating for a career. He was trying to build a path for people who might otherwise spend their lives standing outside locked doors. Then welcome to Whitmore Racing, Mr. Seed. Malcolm picked up the notebook. He held it close to his chest, and for the first time that day, he smiled. When the race began, the Titan V12 did more than survive. It dominated. The car crossed the finish line first, not by a narrow margin, by several full seconds. The engine did not simply run. It sang. Lap after lap, it performed beyond the team's expectations. The car that had seemed finished before the race had become the strongest machine on the circuit. The pit erupted. People shouted. Champagne sprayed. Mechanics hugged one another like people who had survived a disaster together. In a way, they had. But the story that captured the world's attention was not only the victory, it was Malcolm. The video from the garage spread everywhere. Millions of people watched the moment the janitor stepped forward. They saw the laughter. They saw the doubt. They saw Grant's contempt. They saw Malcolm stand quietly in front of an engine that world-class experts could not understand. Then they watched him find the fracture, correct the injector, change the calibration, and bring the Titan back to life. They also saw the way Grant had treated him, the insults, the dismissal. The moment Malcolm was physically removed from the garage simply for daring to say he knew the answer. The footage spread across television, news sites and social media around the world. People were not only amazed by Malcolm's mechanical ability, they were disturbed by how easily someone so gifted had been reduced to a uniform and a job title. Halcyon Automotive, the company behind the enormous sponsorship agreement, released a statement expressing serious concern about the conduct of senior team staff. They expected immediate action. Everett did not wait to be pressured. Grant Whitmore was removed from his position as chief engineer. He lost the authority that had once made everyone in the garage fear his anger. He was reassigned to a quiet logistics role far from the center of engineering decisions. For Grant, the worst consequence was not losing his title. It was being forced to face what had happened. At a press conference after the race, cameras filled the room. Journalists packed the seats. Malcolm sat near the front. Grant walked to the podium. He looked smaller than he had in the garage. His suit seemed to hang differently on his shoulders. His hands trembled as he unfolded a prepared statement. I was wrong. His voice tightened. I judged a man by his uniform, his job, and the color of his skin. I was wrong. Malcolm Reed understood that engine better than I did. He proved more skill, patience, and character than I showed. I owe him an apology that words alone cannot repair. Grant looked directly at Malcolm. I'm sorry. Malcolm stood. He walked toward the podium. The room tensed. Cameras focused. Reporters leaned forward. Many people expected anger. Some expected Malcolm to humiliate Grant in return. Others expected a speech about revenge. Malcolm did none of those things. He extended his hand. Grant took it. His grip was weak. His eyes were wet. Malcolm held the handshake for a moment. Then he gave one quiet nod. The same kind of nod Russell had given him beside the engine, a gesture of acknowledgement without pretending the past had never happened. There was no celebration of Grant's humiliation, no attempt to destroy him, no denial of the harm either, just a man who had spent much of his life being told he did not belong, standing exactly where his ability had always deserved to place him. In the weeks that followed, offers came from racing teams across the world. Some offered larger salaries. Some offered more prestigious titles. Every organization wanted the man who had heard what nearly 100 experts had missed. Malcolm turned them down. He stayed with Whitmore Racing, the same team that had once failed to see him, the same garage where he had been mocked, the same place from which he had been dragged away. He did not stay because he had forgotten what happened. He stayed because revenge was never his goal. Proof was. He wanted to prove that a door could open, and once opened, it could remain open for the next person. He wanted the next gifted young man or woman to enter a garage carrying tools, ideas, and confidence, not a mop. Later, Malcolm stood again in Garage 7. The walls were the same. The concrete floor was the same. The fluorescent lights were the same, but everything else had changed. He now wore an engineer's uniform. His name was stitched clearly above the chest pocket. Beneath it were the words, Lead Engine Specialist. The Titan V12 hummed behind him, tuned according to specifications that had been improved by knowledge once hidden in an old notebook. Beside Malcolm stood the first student supported by the Isaiah Reed Foundation. Young men and women leaning over an engine block for the first time, asking questions, learning with their own hands. On the workbench, open to the V12 diagram, sat Isaiah's cracked leather notebook, the same notebook that had survived rejection, poverty, grief, and decades of being unseen. Now it rested in the center of a professional racing garage, exactly where Isaiah's knowledge had always belonged. Some engines need advanced tools. Some problems need years of study. And sometimes what changes everything is simply a person who has learned how to listen. Malcolm's story is not a lesson against education. Degrees, training, science, and experience all matter. But none of them should become excuses for arrogance. A title can tell us what job someone holds. It cannot tell us the full measure of their mind. A uniform can show us what someone was hired to do. It cannot reveal everything they have survived, learned, practiced, or quietly carried inside them. Real wisdom sometimes comes from classrooms. Sometimes it comes from workshops, family traditions, failure, patience, and years of careful observation. The important thing is to stay humble enough to recognize it when it appears. Kindness matters for the same reason. We rarely know the complete story of the person standing in front of us. The worker cleaning a floor may be carrying a dream no one has asked about. The quiet employee in the corner may understand something everyone else has overlooked. The person who seems invisible may be waiting for one honest chance to show what they can do. And when someone has been treated unfairly, forgiveness does not mean pretending the harm was acceptable. It can mean choosing not to let another person's mistake decide who you become. Malcolm did not answer cruelty with cruelty. He answered it with discipline, truth, and purpose. He accepted an apology without surrendering his dignity. Then he used his opportunity to create opportunities for others. That may be the deepest lesson of all. Talent deserves a chance. Respect should never depend on status. Our choices have consequences. And when we make a mistake, real responsibility begins with admitting it, changing our behavior, and making room for something better. The world becomes a little more human every time we choose to look beyond appearances. Every time we listen before we judge. Every time we open a door that was once closed to someone else. And every time we remember that true strength is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the person who has been ignored for years, quietly learning, quietly enduring, and quietly preparing for the moment when someone finally says, "Show me what you know." When that moment comes, may we be wise enough to listen,